because I'm like, I feel like, there's enough churches already. My mindset was just like, I want to do something that no one else is doing. I want to get out there and actually be more active and actually help people directly. And in my mind, helping people was like really getting involved in a prophecy. Like I said, I actually considered myself to be a prophet. And I know it sounds
I
really
do,
weird.
I do kind of have something to say on that. Like, I have rarely ever seen anybody in the church. At least I was, I guess, might be lucky that my church wasn't like there was no one in my church that was like that.
Yeah.
But like the religious ego on you.
Yeah.
And welcome back to Barf C. This is episode 20. I'm Eric.
I'm Kevin.
So this my podcast mate here, Kevin, has some stories to tell us, and this podcast is going to be a little bit different than what we normally do because this is his story, and that's my piece to say. And I'm going to hand it off to Kevin.
Yeah. Basically, I just kind of wanted to tell my story on like why I left Christianity. You can tell by the title, I guess that's what it's about. But I feel like telling this story might help me move on a little bit because, like, a lot of people in the ex-Christian community, it's kind of weird that that's actually a community, but it is. Uh, they deconstruct in different ways, like, because you don't believe in Christianity anymore, um, that doesn't mean that, the past of like your Christian beliefs still don't like affect you in certain ways or cause you to think certain things or have whole old habits and stuff like that. So like, and when I thought about it, I was like, well, I really only left Christianity about 3.5 years ago. That's really not that long. And I was a Christian for like 18 and a half, 19 years or something like that. And so, when you time out the scale, I mean, it makes sense that I'm still take some here and there influence from Christianity. I think I've gotten a lot better though in the past, particularly in the last like year. I've gotten a lot better. But one of the ways I've been kind of slowly deconstructing myself is by I'm a very jokey, silly kind of person, and so sometimes to help me move on from something, I often will make jokes about it or ridicules about it and stuff like that. And, I want to let anyone know who's Christian, I'm not trying to, make fun of your beliefs or anything like that. I'm mostly doing it from, my own sake. It just helps me kind of move on from that. But in this, I wanted to actually tell a more serious story, and, move the jokes aside for a little while because I think this might help me, kind of put the past behind me a little bit and move on. And like I said, I just kind of wanted to tell my story. So I'm being repetitive now. So let's just get started.
Yeah.
You have anything to add, Eric?
No, this is your episode, my friend. I mean,
But anytime you want to, ask a question or something, feel free to jump in. Because, like I said, Eric's going to be kind of the voice of the audience in a way. So if you, I will post this on Reddit if it hasn't been posted already. If you're listening to this coming from Reddit or whatever. This podcast episode might be convenient for you to listen to because there is a lot of text, on this page. So you may, instead of reading all that text, it might be easier for you to just listen to an episode. So, or
yeah,
the convenience of listening to the episode is also, I'm probably going to give more details than some of the text because the text is sort of an abridged version of the story. And what I'm going to be saying on here is I'll probably get a lot more details. So there's two benefits there. So.
and to say to anybody that does pop up here from the Reddit, welcome. If you do have a question about or a statement about your own belief on you're changing into it or leaving Christianity, if you want to ask Kevin, comment, and on the next video, if there is comments, we will probably address it.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
just to keep things balanced, for anybody who decides to listen to it that are still Christian, if you have a rebuttal to say to Kevin or a question about why he believed that way, also leave it down. And please, no one get into an argument about religion in the comments. I will shut that down. Everyone is, they deserve to believe the way they believe. And this is a more serious topic, and I'm gonna sit back for a little bit, and yeah, if I have a question or thing, I'll ask myself.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Like I said, definitely want to clarify one more time that this isn't about Christianity or other Christians. This is just about me. So it just happens to pertain to this, religion. Like I said, if I was in a different religion, then it would be about that religion. So not hating on Christians. So, all right. So let's get started. My story literally starts at the beginning. So this is I tried to give titles on Reddit to break the pieces to make it a little easier for people to read. Plus, they can skip over parts if it doesn't look interesting to them. But growing up in the church, let's see, I was born and raised in the church. Literally, my pastor at the time, who was the pastor of the church that I grew up in, was at the hospital when I was born. He even held me in his arms before my dad did. However, even though I was raised in church, it was a PCG. For if you don't know what PCG is, it's First Pentecostal Church of God. There's tons of different denominations of Pentecostalism, and they all have slightly different beliefs, but they're all pretty similar, really. But that I grew up in a PCG church, though. As a kid, I never really made it the focus of my life, though. When I was a kid, I didn't really dislike going to church. I liked the people, I guess you could say. I liked, hanging out with the other kids and talking to them and even hanging out with some of the other adults and stuff. But the actual religious side of it, I have to admit, when I was a little kid, like I'm talking like, old enough to be more self-aware, but young enough to where I'm technically not like a preteen or a teenager yet, like kind of that 7, 8, 9 year old kind of age. Um, I really wasn't all that religious minded. It really wasn't something that was a part of who I was. For the most part, there were a few exceptions. Obviously, if you grow up in a church, you're going to take some, influence from it. So I did have some influence, but for the most part, yeah, it wasn't really for me. I even, as far back as I can remember, up till the age of 10, I often considered if I even would go to church when I became an adult myself, because, when you're a kid, you might think forwardly and be like, well, when I'm an adult, I'm going to do this, or I'm not going to do this anymore because I'm only doing this because my parents make me or whatever. And that's kind of the way I thought about church. I want to clarify that I'm not talking about believing in God or believing in the Bible and stuff like that. I think at that age, even at like as young as 7, I already admitted to myself that I technically believed in the Bible and believed in God because, again, I got raised to taught that. Um, so that wasn't the part I was questioning. It was really more just like, did I want to make this part of my life? Did I want to go to church on Sundays and Wednesdays and that kind of stuff? Or would I just be one of those people who just, lived their life, did their thing, tried to be a good person, and they just happened to believe in God and the Bible? That's kind of the life I was considering as an adult when I was a kid. I often, in this text, I often refer to God as Yahweh. That's sort of a inside joke to myself. So it's one of those jokes, like if you get it, you get it. If you don't, then you may not understand why that's a joke. You might just read that and be like, why doesn't he just say God? Why does he keep saying Yahweh? But there is a reason for that. So it's like an inside joke, but I'm not going to explain it because it'd take forever. But, but so I put on here, don't get me wrong. I believed in Yahweh. I believed in the Bible. I mean, it had been hard. What did I type? I think I made a typo here. I mean, I had been taught that my entire life. I spelled entire wrong. After all, I just didn't seem to like the lifestyle I wanted. It didn't seem like the lifestyle I wanted. However, that all changed in the summer of 2002 when I was 11 years old. And so this is the story of how I got saved. I put that in quotations. So basically, this is me converting to a Christian. when I was 11 years old, for some reason, I felt called to the altar to pray. There's a typo there too. We had an if I can speak right, I'm sorry, y'all. You know what I'm trying to say. Evangelicus preacher, I keep messing that up. Preaching that night, and he was praying over people at the altar, as evangelicals often do. When he got to me, he asked me if I needed to get saved, probably because he saw my age and thought, oh, this is I'm not going to go too specific in the reasons, but from my point of view, I can take a wild guess on why he asked me that question. I guess it's because I was young. He probably figured I'd never said the sinner's prayer before. I actually had, but admittedly, I probably never really meant it before that point. So I said yes, I needed to get saved, and I know the drill. You know the drill. I repeated everything he said and made Jesus Christ my Lord and Savior. I took this moment so seriously. From that moment on, every day I prayed, I read my Bible, I started praying, paying more attention to the preacher, and started to apply what he said to my everyday life. Yeah, because pretty much up to this point as a kid, this was back before the days of a lot of churches had. Nowadays, that this problem is semi-solved in most churches, because most churches have like a daycare area and stuff like that for especially for little kids.
Yeah.
But back in these days, there was many churches, especially small churches like the one I grew up in, that they didn't have that. And some churches were even against that idea because they didn't like the idea of separating their kids from their parents, because they felt like they should see their parents, worshiping God, participating in, all this stuff. And so it kind of, more or less brings influence on them, and of course, in their minds, they see that as a good thing, because they're, hey, you're teaching things about the things of God and all that stuff. But viewing it from the outside in, you're like, what the heck's wrong with these people? Um, but yeah, that was so when I was a kid, church. That's probably one of the reasons why I was so dang bored in church all so much. I would, play with toys. So if I brought them, sometimes I couldn't bring too many, but sometimes I could get away with bringing a couple of them. I remember playing on my mom's calculator a lot when I was a kid. Like my mom had a little calculator in her purse, and I'd sit there and play on it sometimes, because anything to take away the boredom was. When I got a little older, sometimes we had a little kitchen right next to the sanctuary, and sometimes I would go in there and pretend like I was just getting a glass of water, and I would go in there and sneak in there and just kind of sit down. Which, not that I was much more entertained in there, but at least, I just, it was something different, I guess. Sometimes a different scenery makes a situation more entertaining. I don't know. Plus, then you can feel free to talk a little louder with, if you can. Sometimes me and my sister would go in there together, or me and one of the other kids in church would go in there, and then you can actually talk without interrupting the preaching or the worship or anything. So let's see, where was I? Later, when I realized this was a super common thing, this is not a super common thing for kids my age. Well, and what I mean by that, I started to become very okay. What I mean by that is kids at like the preteen age, they might become more like Christian-like, where they start to, like when your hormones change, you start to feel more like an adult. You're not quite an adult yet, but you start to feel like one. And a lot of kids, like preteens and young teenagers, they often want to do what the other adults are doing, right? And because they're like, oh, I'm becoming an adult, and so I want to do what they're doing. And so in the Christian world, a lot of times when you hit that preteen, young teenager age, you see how religious the other adults are. So sometimes you become very religious, and that happens a lot in churches and youth groups and stuff like that. So what I mean by this statement when I said it wasn't super common for kids my age is, I mean the whole concept of, I realized when I went to like some of these other kids' houses, like whether it was a cousin of mine or something, that they weren't really living what I would consider to be a Christian life behind closed doors. but I realized that like when they were at school or church or something, they'd be like, oh yeah, God, Jesus, blah blah blah. But then when we were at home, it just kind of felt like they were just living, weren't doing anything what I considered bad or sinful, but they just weren't, doing really anything that I would consider to be a Christian life. It's like I don't feel like they're living any different than anyone else. So that's kind of what I was trying to put myself in the mind frame of that age again. So, but I was actually one of those people, even when no one was around, I was legitimately praying. I was legitimately reading my Bible. And I would even take notes sometimes on like what the pastor was saying. I was doing all these things that I was seeing all these other kids my age, even though the ones that claimed to be Christian and stuff like that weren't doing. And so this started to make me feel differently about myself. You can see where this is going. I started to become very judgmental towards other Christians, not other sinners. I want to clarify, like if someone was not Christian or did not believe that way, and I was aware of that, I was not judgmental of those people. Never was judgmental. Even in fact, my entire Christian life, I was never judgmental of non-Christians. If someone wasn't a Christian, they were doing something that I would have considered to be sinful, it didn't make me upset or judgmental toward that person because I was like, well, they're a sinner. That's what sinners do, right? So they do that. But I was like, if they were a Christian or claimed to be Christian, then I was very judgmental toward them. I had that. I read my Bible and prayed, and you people do whatever you want and call yourselves Christians kind of attitude. I was probably not a very pleasant person to be around. This went on until I was about 14 years old. I started to change my attitude a lot and started to become much more forgiving Christian in person in general. I started being more understanding as well. I think there were two reasons for this. Reason number one, I thought of Yahweh, again, I refer to him as Yahweh as a very forgiving and understanding God. I wanted to be like him, so I took on that personality as well. Reason number two, I had some skeletons in my closet. And that this is going to bring me to the next part of my story here. But I do want to clarify, this is a statement I wanted to say that I realized after I quit Christianity. Because, like, a lot of people, if you pay close attention to the Christian community, you'll notice that people often view Jesus. They paint Jesus in a way that is to their liking, if that makes sense. Like, if they believe in capitalism and conservatism and this kind of stuff politically, or it maybe not even be political, maybe they believe a certain way about, if that's the way they view, then in their mind that's the way Jesus is. A lot of Christians will do that if they and so I did the exact same thing with God. The Christian God Yahweh. I saw, I decided I wanted to be a very forgiving person, a very understanding person. At the time, I didn't realize this is what was happening, but because I really thought it was like, oh, God, I realized God was this way, and then it made me want to be that way. But really looking back, it was just like, I admitted to myself, I didn't like myself as a judgmental Christian, and I started to realize that as I got older. So I wanted to become, more forgiving, more understanding, of other people's backgrounds. I realized that people have different, ways of being raised. Not everyone was raised in the same house I was, the same church I was, et cetera, et cetera. But I kind of, so I painted God that way too, where I was like, I saw him as I went from him being this judgmental kind of person toward all these other Christians, like, oh, they're not really Christians, even though they claim to be. And it switched up to him being more like this very forgiving, understanding, like, oh, God gets it. He understands, like, yes, that is a sin, but he understands, people struggle with things. Everybody has their own struggles. And that was my attitude about it. So now getting to reason number two, I did have some quote unquote skeletons in my closet. So this is another part of my story that it's tied up. The reason why I wanted to tell this is because it's kind of tied up in Christianity, my Christian beliefs that I had. But because this is a very common, and it's become also very extreme even today's age. But again, I don't want to get into all that because I don't want to get into political stuff, but not too much anyway. but you can also view this as sort of a side story too, because it also there's a lot of little stories that this pertains to that really has nothing to do with my Christianity beliefs at all that I used to have. So anyway, let's get into it. Is there anything you want to add so far, Eric, before I move on?
No, there's nothing I need to add.
I feel like I'm talking like a million miles a minute, but don't worry, there's still plenty of text and plenty of stuff to go over. So don't feel like I'm moving along too quickly. I'm just and that was also you can kind of view those first two parts of the story as sort of like the intro. As I get further into stuff, I'll have a lot more stuff to say. So it might actually be beneficial. So hopefully everyone can comprehend what I'm saying, because like I said, I have the habit of once I start explaining something, like I said, I do talk like really, really fast. Especially if I already kind of know what I'm going to say, sort of thing. And I did kind of rehearse bits and pieces of this. I mean, I typed it out and everything after all. So
the audience, I'm in this podcast episode for about a month or so.
Do what now?
Because the audience don't know. To them, you've been playing this for over a month now?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it was close to the beginning of this year. I want to say like early February was when I first kind of thought about the idea of doing this. Because originally it started where I was just going to make like a Reddit post, and that's all it was going to be. I was like, I think I want to tell my full Christian story on Reddit, like the whole thing all in one shebang. But then I thought it would probably be a little easier for people to understand if I just kind of talked my way through this. And I was like, I could just make this an episode on the podcast. I'm like, as long as Eric was okay with it. So that's when I brought it to your attention. You said it was cool. And I was like, well, I'll just do both. So I'll just post on Reddit, and then I can put a little link on there for people who want to listen to just the audio. Like I said, I want to clarify that, you don't have to I'm not trying to advertise the podcast. I'm just saying this is just a convenient episode for that. But if you do like, listen to another episode and you like what you hear, yeah, definitely follow and subscribe. I say I don't want to advertise, and then I turn around and advertise. In case you don't know that you're allowed to follow and subscribe, I just want to let you know that you're allowed to do that. Let me get a drink real quick.
Dang.
Can you tell I don't like talking about this kind of stuff? Yeah. There's a reason why I never talk about my personal life when it comes to Christianity stuff. Now, I don't mind talking about other stuff in my past, but because my past is more than my Christian, some people, I hear some people on the ex-Christian subreddit and even on Instagram and stuff, because I follow a lot of different people on Instagram that also used to be Christians. And they often, it's kind of like the impression you get is like their entire life was like Christianity before they left. And I was like, it really wasn't like that for me, at least not until I hit my 20s. And like I said, I'm getting to that. Trust me, the really traumatizing stuff kicks in when I hit my 20s. That's when things get really weird and very traumatizing stuff. And that's the stuff I'm trying to heal from now that I'm not a Christian from. I'm trying to mentally and emotionally kind of heal from all that stuff. So my childhood, I was actually okay with most of the stuff. Like I said, I was bored in church and I didn't really like going, and I do kind of regret ever converting to Christianity. But at the end of the day, it didn't really cause that many problems for my life doing those things. So,
yeah. Yes. When you asked me about this, doing this episode, I'm going to give you time to recollect yourself and get ready.
Yeah.
I was very okay with it because, we both grew up Christian, but my journey was a little easier than yours, I guess, because I quickly, in my, I want to say when I was 14, 15, and maybe even earlier than that, decided I don't like church because I don't trust people.
Yeah.
And if it's written by people, I don't fully trust it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what you say, you have to have faith, but I digress.
That's such a cop-out thing, too. Like, oh, you got to have faith.
But as mine was just, I'm out. I told my mom I just don't feel like going to church. And I have gone to church a few times since, because I had friends that went to church. I went to church with them when I started night. Their parents didn't expect me to really be part of anything, but it was just kind of I went there because they did.
Yeah.
My wife and her family, they were Pentecostal holiness, if I remember correctly. They're one of the Pentecostals.
Yeah.
I went to church when I lived up around them. Now that I'm here away from anybody that goes to church, I don't know anybody that actually goes to church. I'm like, yes, I don't have to go to church. There's no one that's expecting me to go with them to hang out. I just never liked the fact of a church building. When I was a kid, I liked it because, well, when I was a kid, my church had the fun spots where kids can go and play and learn and
Of course,
sing.
they do that stuff on purpose.
Once you become a teen and there's no longer that, it's like, oh, for me, it didn't hold my attention. Now, do I still believe God and devil and all that? Yeah. But as you know, and I don't know if I've said on the podcast, I'm pagan.
Yeah.
So I have more of a journey into that, and which is because I've experienced the world and other cultures and religions. But
Right.
that's about me. You ready to continue?
All right. So moving on to the next part. So that was sort of the intro. So the skeletons in my closet. So what am I referring to here? So it says from a very young age, I could tell that I had an attraction to guys. The earliest I can remember, I'm a guy, by the way, for people who don't, realize maybe my voice is kind of feminine. Maybe you don't realize. The earliest I can remember having a crush on a boy is in first grade at school when I was about 6 years old. Although I didn't really understand that feeling at the time, I realized later what it was is I had my first crush, essentially. I just didn't know what that was when I was that age. Um, I never heard the term gay before, and I didn't really understand the meaning all that much. The first I think I'd ever heard that term was when I was maybe like 8 years old, and I always heard to it because this was back in the 90s when they usually would say something like use the word gay for like something stupid. They're like, oh, that's gay or whatever. And so even when I first heard the term, I didn't really know what it meant. So it really wasn't until I was maybe like almost 10 years old was when I actually understood what it actually meant. But yeah, but at the time, I didn't consider myself gay when I learned what gay actually meant because I also liked girls. So I thought maybe this is just some weird phase I'm having. I wasn't sure, so I tried not to think about it too much. Where am I? However, in my eighth grade health class, I finally learned the term bi or bisexual. I'd never heard that term either till I was in eighth grade. When I was about 13 years old, and I thought this must be what I am, since I like girls and guys. I heard sermons at church that talked about the spirit of homosexuality or the demon of homosexuality. So, since I had this sin that I couldn't seem to get rid of, no matter how much I prayed or, and did whatever I thought I could do, because sometimes as a Christian, if you struggle with some kind of sin, what you deem as a sin, it doesn't have to be like, homosexuality. It could be something completely different. Sometimes you might think the more religious you are, the more maybe that'll help it go away or help solve the problem or whatever. I know a lot of Christians like, oh, if I just start, being super strict with myself, I got to read my Bible constantly and pray constantly and constantly think about the things of God and stop watching any secular shows or, basically just more religious you get with it, you think that eventually this will solve the problem. And I tried pretty much anything any Christian can think of. And, obviously it didn't just automatically go away. So I tried my best to understand. Wait, what am I typing here? I tried my best to be understanding when other Christians were struggling with what I considered to be their sin. I knew that I was struggling with something that I was considering to be a sin. So I tried my best to be understanding when they were struggling with whatever it was that they were struggling with. So that was basically reason number two. I'll go into a little bit more detail on this, but again, beyond this little phrase that I put in this, it really has nothing else to do with my Christian beliefs. But I will go into a little bit more detail. As I got older, like especially in my mid-teens, I started to kind of change my opinion about homosexuality a little bit. Actually, about various social issues in general, um, social topics. I I no longer started to have that mindset that where, I researched throughout the Bible and did my own, prayer time with God at the time. And my own experience, like I said, obviously I'm slightly biased because I was literally struggling with what most Christians, some Christians would consider to be a sin. I know there's some disagreements with that nowadays, especially with the Catholic Church. I know quite a few Catholics I don't think actually consider homosexuality to be a sin anymore. But but I'll leave that with them. I don't know anything about it. But um, so based on my experience, I just personally didn't consider it to actually be a sinful thing. So this is going to sound a little strange. So let me try to explain this the best way I can. I believed when I was a Christian, I believed, like when I read the Genesis chapter 1, like in the creation of Adam and Eve and the creation of the world and stuff, I believed in that very literally. I had no reason not to. I didn't know much about evolution at the time, so I didn't really understand it. And so I just kind of, when I read that story, I just took it very literally. I never thought about the timing of things. Like I know there's creationists that literally believe in a 6,000-year Earth, but at this time in my life, I didn't really think about it like that because I never thought about the dates. I just believed that at one point of time, God created the world and He created Adam and Eve. And so a lot of Christians always use that as a reason why you're not supposed to be in this relationship with like the same sex and stuff like that, because you're like, they make that joke or whatever it's supposed to be, that God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve kind of thing. And I looked at it like this. God designed it to be like marriage and offspring, obviously. If you're going to have kids, obviously it has to be a guy and a girl. But, He designed it to be between a man and a woman. But that doesn't necessarily mean that He considers it a sin just because, you want to have a relationship with, the same sex. And that was just kind of my viewpoint, because there was a lot of things that God created to be a certain way when the earth was originally created, but it's not like that anymore. He also, evidently, according to the Bible, He made Adam and Eve to be vegetarian. They didn't eat meat at the time, according to the Bible. But now it's okay for Christians to eat meat, and even Jewish people, as long as they don't eat pork, to eat meat, So it's like, would that be considered a sin just because you're basing it off that? So that was kind of my viewpoint. Where God didn't really intend it to be that way, but He was okay with it being that way. That's kind of the way I viewed it. And I did have certain viewpoints that I did as a Christian, even up into my later teens, throughout my 20s and stuff. I didn't believe in sex outside of marriage because that was something that was really pushed on me when I was younger. And so at the time in America, in most states anyway, gay marriage was actually still illegal at the time. And so I didn't think I would ever actually get married to another guy. So when I hit a certain age, I just kind of, when it came to being around other Christians, being at church and stuff like that, I basically just kind of pretended like it didn't exist, that side of myself. And it was convenient for me since did consider myself to be bisexual at the time. And so it was just kind of easy to just kind of ignore that part of myself when I was around other Christians in the church. But personally, I was very aware of what my attractions were. And me and God were, in my mind, me and God were okay with it. So, but I knew that not all Christians would be. So I just felt like it was best to stay quiet about it and just not say anything. It's just like as if me and another Christian had a disagreement with maybe an interpretation of a scripture or something in the Bible, which does happen actually quite often in the church, if you ever, are a part of that. sometimes it's just best not to argue about it or bicker about it. Just agree to disagree. Like, I just personally see it this way, and I guess they see it that way. Most Christians would probably gain the mindset. It's like, well, they can be wrong all they want, but I know I'm right kind of attitude about it. Uh, but yeah, there are disagreements with certain things. And that was just kind of something way I viewed it. I was just like, yeah, this is just a disagreement that, me and a lot of the church I was going to at the time, I'd hear the pastor preach on something about homosexuality or something, and I just let it go through one ear and out the other. I was just like, yeah, I just have a disagreement with that. I just don't believe it's a sin. So personally, and that was just my viewpoint at the time. So at first I did kind of believe it was a sin, and then later on I decided that I didn't see it that way. So that's my story of that, and that's pretty much all I could go into way more details about certain stories and stuff, but it really has nothing to do with my Christian life that I used to have. So let's see, that moves on. So that was throughout my teenage years. Really nothing much changed through my later teenage years. Like I said, I just kind of was, living my personal Christian life. I still prayed, I still read my Bible. I had my things I struggled with, like all Christians did, and just worked my way through them. When I hit about the age of 20, I might have still been 19 at the time, but pretty much about the age of 20. I, due to various circumstances, basically it kind of started with, there was a quote unquote revival going on. I was living in Iowa at the time, in Cedar Rapids. And there was in my church that I grew up in, or partially grew up in my teen years, because I was a PCG when I was a kid, but I switched to Assemblies of God when I was a teenager. And Assemblies of God is essentially just another Pentecostal church. But the difference with Assemblies of God is they're very particular with some of their beliefs, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But anyway, there was a revival going on in the church, and I was a little jealous, and so I kind of wanted to be a part of it in any way I could, even though I lived in another state. And so I kind of declared myself a lot of things when I was just turned 20. I declared myself as because when I was a teenager, I never saw myself as a minister. I never viewed myself going into the ministry and, being a pastor or, I could see myself maybe playing piano in church because I loved playing piano, and I played a lot of Christian songs when I was at home, but I was just kind of doing that for fun. I never thought oh, I'm going to be in a Christian band, or I'm going to be an official paid praise and worship leader. But hey, if I'm ever going to a church that might need help with some of the worship and wants someone to play an instrument, hey, I'm down, I can play piano or something, I can do backup vocals or something like that. So that's about as far as I could have seen myself doing anything like that. But that I declared myself like I was called into the ministry. And I also declared, this is going to sound kind of weird to anybody who's not maybe you were a Christian, but maybe you were a Baptist or whatever. And even some Pentecostals would probably find this a little weird, but I also kind of declared myself to be a prophet. I know that sounds really weird, but, it just shows how kind of spiritually full of myself I was when I was at that age. And so I felt called to be in the ministry. I felt like I was supposed to teach the gospel around the USA and be a praise and worship leader in many churches. From my early 20s to mid 20s, this caused major problems with my mental health. Do you have any questions or anything, Eric?
No.
Okay.
Everything's going good so far. I mean, there's nothing I really play.
I just wanted to make sure I explained all that really well, because I was like, well, I feel like every time I start talking really fast, I'm like, I may not be explaining this really well. But anyway, yeah, it caused major problems with my mental health. For example, I wanted to also work on side projects like making YouTube videos, making music, non-Christian music, that is, because I was really into like electronic dance music at the time. I still am, just not quite as into it as I was at that time. And I wanted to be like, the next Daft Punk or whatever. And and so I was, I wanted to do those things, and I'll always, from like the time I was like probably, I don't know, like 13, 14 years old, I had a strong interest in wanting to make video games. But a lot of the times I would hold myself back from doing those things because I would feel guilty that I wasn't working on the ministry like I was supposed to be. It even got to the point where working my paying 9 to 5 job, whatever the job would have been at the time, because I, rotated various jobs when all this was going on, but made me feel guilty because I felt like it was just distracting me from the ministry, which is a crazy mindset to have when you feel like your job, you literally need to pay your bills and stuff, is actually, you start to feel guilty about having it, or it feels like wrong, like you have a job. I'm like, what the heck's wrong, with my mentality, I swear. This cycle would continue until I was about 24 or 25 years old. I was 25 years old and still no ministry was happening. And believe you me, I tried all kinds of things. I wasn't like, there's a lot of Christians that when I was a Christian, I remember like other Christians talking about, oh, I feel called to do this or I feel called to do that and blah, blah, blah. A lot of Christians, especially in, I can't speak for it's probably like that in other denominations too. I just can't speak for that firsthand because I'm more familiar with the, the Pentecostal Assembly of God kind of community. But there's a lot of Christians that feel that, but I also often would notice their lives, especially people I knew more personally, and it's like they were never really doing anything about it. It's like, I mean, they wouldn't even pray about it or ask God, what some of the steps he wanted them to take, in order to get this thing started, what's the right time, maybe am I waiting on a certain timing? What's the right timing? And even if they weren't getting an answer, it's like they weren't really even at least trying to attempt to, do those things. But me, like, I just didn't have that mentality, I had a very like let's get going, and I guess I'm still kind of like that today, but especially when I was a Christian, I was like, if I felt called to be in the ministry, I was like, I wanted it to happen like, yesterday. I'm like, let's get this started, it's time, it's time to get this started. And but I would notice with other Christians, they just weren't like me in that same mindset. They often would be like, well, it'll happen in its timing. I'm like, no, you have to, you got to do it. You got to make something happen. And but this had been going on for almost 5 years at this point, and just nothing. I mean, it was just like not even other than maybe a YouTube channel I was running at the time, because I did have a Christian YouTube channel I also ran as well, where I would just teach nothing too crazy, just some everyday life Christian stuff. I did talk about end times sometimes a little bit, because when I was a Christian, I was obsessed with end times and prophecy. Those were my two biggest obsessions. But so I did talk about end times a little bit, but most of the stuff I taught was just like standard Christian stuff. So other than like the YouTube channel, like really nothing was happening. So I became very disappointed, and I felt like a failure. I felt like I had let Yahweh, there I go again, down, and I kept thinking I must have done something wrong. Maybe I missed some kind of opportunity that Yahweh had for me. By this point, I had become very depressed. I stayed in my room every day for hours because I didn't want to see anyone. I started eating tons of junk food for nearly a year straight, and eventually gained about 50 pounds. I remember looking in the mirror one random day and seeing how much weight I'd put on. I felt like a failure with the ministry and a failure with my life in general. So that's my story of my obsession with the ministry. I know it's such a happy note to leave on.
Right.
And that's not even the most extreme part. It gets more extreme than this. So I'm just waiting until you read the next part. or listen to the next part, I guess.
You can read the next part. I listen.
Yeah. But yeah, so let's see let me scan real quick if there's anything I feel like I need to clarify. Is there any questions you have maybe?
Well, I mean, it's funny because you wanted to be in the ministry. I wanted to be an exorcist.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that once.
And the funny thing is, I was never raised Catholic, but I wanted to be an exorcist because my thought on it was, why sit here and preach about it when I can go and actually help someone fight demons?
Right. That was kind of my viewpoint too. I didn't want to just be a standard preacher in a church, because I'm like, I feel like, there's enough churches already. My mindset was just like, I want to do something that no one else is doing. I want to get out there and actually be more active and actually help people directly. And in my mind, helping people was like really getting involved in a prophecy. Like I said, I actually considered myself to be a prophet. And I know it sounds really weird.
I do kind of have something to say on that. Like, I have rarely ever seen anybody in the church. At least I was, I guess, might be lucky that my church wasn't like, there was no one in my church that was like that.
Yeah.
But like, the religious ego on you.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not trying to bash anybody that thinks they're a prophet. Like, technically, none of the. I mean, in some aspects, depends on how you believe it. I mean, anybody can be a prophet in a sense.
Yeah.
I guess it'd be more of a saint. You can't really be as easily. You have to do something special.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, all the prophets did were write down stories. So, I mean, but still.
I know it's a very weird thing I look back on. At the time, I was just like, every time, I was almost like getting off to it in a way. I was very full of myself. Like, just like every time I'd even think about myself as a prophet, I was like, oh, yes, this is amazing kind of attitude about it. But now, looking back on it now, I'm just like, oh my God, that's like so cringy. I can't believe I actually thought I was a prophet.
Question is like, what put it in your head that you were a prophet?
Well, to kind of give the story in a nutshell, like I said, when I was living in Iowa, there was a revival going on at the time at the church that I was attended a lot in my later like teen years and stuff before I'd moved. And they started to take on some kind of strange beliefs. And like I said, some of these beliefs might even be foreign to other Pentecostals. I want to clarify that not even all Pentecostals believe like this. That, if they started hearing me refer to myself as a prophet, if I went like, oh, I'm Prophet Kevin Emery or whatever, they'd give me strange looks. I'd be like, what the heck are you talking about? And
Yeah.
and but they started to take on some kind of strange beliefs. And I won't mention who the person is, but basically someone I know that was also still attending this revival, and I was talking to them on the phone, said they started taking I don't know where they got the test from. I don't know if they got it from the evangelical that was preaching at the church at the time, because in the Christian world, Pentecostal world, they when they have a revival, they often have a guest evangelical usually come and preach at the church, and they're usually the ones they look at as like the leader of this revival. I'm not sure why it happens that way. It just always has happened that way. It's just it happened that way at one point in time, and everyone just just does the exact same thing. And so that's pretty much what was going on. I didn't know if that's where they got the test from, or if someone else in the church, just made this test up or what. But they created this little test that you take, and it's one of those tests to see. It's not like you're graded on it. It's to see if you qualify as such and such. If you've ever taken a test like that, to see it's to test you to see how that. Well, I mean, I guess all tests are that's to see how smart you are, but you get what I'm saying. I was trying to think of an actual non-Christian example, but now I can't think of one. Like maybe if you're getting tested for some kind of learning disability or something in school, sometimes they'll give kids some tests because they suspect they may have some kind of learning disability, and they want to check that, so they might run some kind of test on them to see if they do. And so this is, you could kind of compare it maybe to something like this. So they came up with this test. Again, I don't know where they got it from, and to see if it's basically tests you to see if you qualify as a prophet or not. And their mind, they viewed things, they basically based it off of the way the prophets in the Bible, typically their viewpoints and how they thought about things. And so that's basically what the questions were based off basically their personality, the personality of Elijah, Elisha, Daniel, the prophet, and, John the Baptist was considered to be a prophet in the New Testament, and various things like that. They probably even threw some things that personalities from Jesus in there, I'm sure. And so you take that test to see if you have those same viewpoints about things. And well, I passed with flying colors apparently, because I got almost every one of them right except for one, or not right, but like, in the way that they would see you as a prophet. So apparently my way I believed about things were very, when I became a Christian, like I said, I made up my mind. I did not want to be one of those Christians that just, went to church on a Sunday and got a quick lesson and then just came home and then just, didn't really do much in your life. I wanted to be a very active Christian, and so that's kind of what the test was. It was just seeing if you were that kind of Christian, really. Like, do you want to change the world and see everyone, get saved, and, just crazy stuff. I don't remember if that was one of the questions, but just stuff like that. And I was like, oh yeah, definitely. I want that. I want, I want to see the fire, quote unquote, the fire of God come down and, and purify the world kind of mentality. That was my mentality. And so I believe once I took this test and did that, I think it really went to my head. And so I considered myself to be a prophet. Yeah. And became very, very interested in prophecy and end times and stuff like that. So,
interesting.
Again, I know that sounds weird, but yeah,
it's not really that weird considering the fact that you took a test that was like test see if you're like the prophets.
Yeah, pretty much that's what it was. Are you like the prophets of the Bible? That's pretty much what the test was. So,
yeah, but for someone being like, "Oh, I'm just like the prophets," and they were special.
Yeah,
I'm special.
I wanted to be special. Yeah, I didn't want to just be your everyday Christian. I wanted to be viewed as special and wanted to feel special too. And that made me feel special.
Two different types of Christian.
In the Christian world, often what makes you feel more special is basically just becoming weirder than all the other Christians. And that's kind of what I did. I just, like, the weirder of a Christian I became, the more special I felt, if that makes sense. So,
yeah. I mean, it makes sense.
And trust me, it gets weirder than that. Once I start reading the next part, it gets weirder. So,
I'm going to shut up and strap in.
Yeah. So anyway, that was my obsession with joining the ministry. This is sort of a continuation of that with more weirdness involved. So this is titled "A Slave for Christ" or "A Slave of Christ." In saying all that, after feeling like I hit rock bottom, I actually started to feel much better a few months after that. However, this wouldn't last long. Excuse me. I started eating better and was losing some weight. Also started reading my Bible and praying again because, I had actually stopped doing that for a little while because I just became so depressed. One day I came across a verse in the Bible, 1 Corinthians 7:22. You can look it up yourself if you want to, whoever's listening. That talked about being a slave for Christ. And I was kind of taken aback by this verse. I knew the church was doing the work of Yahweh, but slaves, that seemed a little extreme to me. Keep in mind that I was reading the New Living Translation because that was the translation of the Bible I was kind of obsessed with at that time. Before that, I usually always read the King James Version. I think the other versions do say like servant of Christ or something like that, which sounds a little nicer. And I read I read the chapter a few times and prayed about it for a few weeks, and finally decided if that's what the Bible said, then that's what I was going to do. For the next 2 years, I took on a really bizarre mindset where I literally thought of myself as God's slave.
The slave of God.
So yeah, this kind of goes back to me, like talking about what I just did a second ago, where a lot of times if a Christian feels like, or at least me, and I knew other Christians that had the same mentality, they probably just weren't quite as extreme as I was, but where if they feel like things weren't going the way that they felt like God, because maybe they prayed about it and they truly believed that God told them this was going to happen or whatever in their life, and it just wasn't happening. They immediately was just like, oh, I just need to become more religious and I need to become more, extreme. And, or maybe they're struggling with some quote unquote sin or whatever, and they just can't seem to pray it away or whatever. And no matter how much they try, just like they keep giving into it. And so they're like, if I just become more religious, maybe this will go away. And this is I think this is kind of why I started to take on this mentality. Not only because I found this in the Bible, but like I said, it just seemed like such a good gateway to maybe make this ministry thing actually happen. I was like, if I just become God's slave, maybe he'll, make this happen, um, so this caused me to stay at home a lot, separate myself from people a whole lot more than I already was before that, even from other Christians, because they just weren't thinking like I was. So I could spend more time with God. Another thing I did was I wouldn't do anything without God's permission, like not even watching a movie or a TV show without checking in on with him first to see if it was okay. I would praise and worship. I don't know if he gave me the thumbs up or what he did I guess I just went by the feeling. If it felt okay, then, then I would watch it. Or if it didn't feel right, then I wouldn't watch it. I guess that's what I was doing. Because it's not like God like put his hand through the window and went, oh yeah, you watch that. Then you're good.
It's a good movie. I recommend it.
I recommend that movie. All right, I'll watch it. Yeah, I mean, you're the boss. You're the boss.
Okay. If God or a God, a general, knocked on my door because I was thinking about watching the movie, and I opened, and he's like, "Dude, watch that movie. It's freaking great." I'm gonna be like, "Okay, yeah, all right, I'm watching that movie."
Oh, I agree with you. I would too. Like, yeah, if even if it was like Thor or something that showed up at the door, like, I recommend you. I'll watch it. Yeah, I'll watch it. Yeah.
But yeah, your mentality was getting very close to becoming like you could do something bad, but to you it'd be good because it felt.
And that some Christians have like, oh, God told me to do it, so therefore it's a good thing, even though it's actually a bad thing. But in my mind, it's a good thing because I did it because God told me to do it. So, and luckily, I never did anything like that. So it never got quite that weird, but it was very, very borderline that close. Yeah. So, I would praise and worship him on a daily basis. And I was pretty extreme without going into details. Like when I say I praise and worship him, I mean like physically, literally, yeah, like in my living room, yeah, for hours a day. Like, and so, people come home from work and they watch TV and stuff like that. I came home from work and literally started putting on Christian music and like jumping around like an idiot. And, like I was losing my mind. And because I was just so dang desperate for this, extreme supernatural life that I wanted to happen for me. And I just really believed that if I could just physically force it to happen, it would happen. So during this praise time, I would speak in tongues. It got to the point where I was speaking in tongues so much, because like I said, I was doing this on a daily basis for hours a day, that I finally started to ask myself, am I faking this? Basically what was happening is as I was supposedly speaking in tongues, I started to kind of when you do it a whole lot, because I think when a lot of Christians don't notice because they only do it in like sparing moments, like typically at church, most Christians, I think. I don't think they realize, but you're kind of saying the same things over and over again. I started to notice, and not only with myself, but when I would go to church, I would notice other Christians doing this too. Like they would literally be saying the same things over and over again. But then when someone would do an interpretation, because it might be a tongues interpretation of tongues in the church, it would be like this long dragged out prophecy that would be like all these different. I was like, how did they get all that out of like this same sentence being said like 3 times in a row, and somehow they got all that out of it? I know sometimes when you translate words from one language to another, it can, you have to kind of like translate it. You're not only are you literally, you might not be literally translating it. You might be, because like when you translate something from Spanish to English, you might not want to literally always translate it because it might not make a lot of sense to like your everyday American. You might want to phrase it a little differently, like, well, an American would say it like this. So I understand that part, but it was an extreme change with that. And that kind of, I just took aback by that and started to notice little things like that, especially like I said with myself. I was like, I'm kind of saying the same things over and over again. I'm like, so I just started kind of questioning. I'm like, am I faking this? So that ends the my slave of Christ part. Any questions so far?
Well, basically what you're saying is because you realized you were saying the same thing over and over in tongues, like the same syllables and whatever, you started questioning what you were actually doing.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's not like I immediately was like, oh, I don't believe this anymore, or I don't think I'm actually doing it. I was just kind of questioning it a little bit. It raised some questions in my mind. So, and of course, I would go through spells back and forth because, like I said, keep in mind when I'm reading this, it might make it sound like all this happened in like a week or something, but this is something that went on for some of this stuff went on for literally years, and I would go back and forth. Couldn't make up my mind. And this was one of those things where I'm like, am I faking this? And so sometimes I would go through spells where I would kind of doubt it a little bit. And then sometimes I would go through spells where I would be like, oh, that's just the enemy trying to plant seeds of doubt in my mind. So I don't need to think like that. So I need to understand that this is actually happening kind of mentality. So I would sway back and forth a little bit on it. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like I said, the text really is kind of an abridged version of the story. That's why I really recommend anyone, even if you do read the text, to maybe come. I mean, it's hard. I mean, if you're not hearing me say this unless you're already listening to the episode, but I do recommend that you actually listen to the episode because I can clarify a little bit easier than you might the impression you might get from the text. Like you get the idea, but when you read it, but you might get a little different impression from it. So anyway. So that's the end of that. So this brings me in the next part of the story called Leaving Pentecostalism. Like I said, this is when my deconstruction from Christianity kind of started, but it came in stages. I've heard various different people, like ex-Christians, tell their stories on how and why they quit Christianity. Some of them, they quit on a whim. It seemed like it was all, or at least it seems that way when I read their text or heard their quick story, because maybe they were just trying to give a quick, they didn't want to like ramble on too much like what I'm doing. And, I kind of got the impression with some of them that it was just like they, just decided that it wasn't for them anymore for whatever reason. And then they just left. Well, that's not the way it happened for me. Mine came in stages. So it was like, I doubted this first, and then it slowly led to other things. So the first thing I started to doubt was my denominational beliefs, basically just Pentecostalism. So in the Assembly of God church, like I said, I mentioned earlier that they were also a Pentecostal denomination. They still are there. But they have like what they refer to as their 16 fundamental truths. And they take these things very, very seriously. The longer your Assembly of God church attender or a member of the Assembly of God denomination, the more you start to understand how seriously they take these 16 fundamental truths. I mean, they take these like this is almost like their Bible more than the actual Bible is. I mean, they take these very seriously. And this is like the 10 Commandments kind of thing of their denomination. And one of the, you can look them up and Google them. I won't like tell you every single one of them. I don't even remember what all 16 are, but I remember most of them. One of them, though, was the teaching of the rapture and the timing, particularly the timing of the rapture. A lot of Christians believe in this concept called the rapture. I'll quickly try to explain it for people that may not be a Christian, or maybe you're a Christian, you just never heard this concept before, or don't fully understand it. Basically, they believe at the end of time, there will be a person that will rise up to political power called the Antichrist, or that's what Christians call him anyway. And this, once he rises to power, this will begin a 7-year, what they call a 7-year tribulation. Well, in this 7-year tribulation, they believe a lot, even Baptists, tons of other denominations believe this same concept on this rapture. But most Christians believe in what is called the post-tribulational rapture. This is where they believe at the end of the 7 years, God will rapture out the church and basically anybody that is a follower of him. And then he's going to pour out his wrath, sort of all at once. There's various beliefs on how long the wrath part takes, but that's irrelevant. Basically, the rapture takes place at the end because, they believe that God's people are not appointed to wrath. That's for the sinners and the, disbelievers. And so he's going to basically pour out his wrath on all the earth, and people are just going to be, it's going to be like hell on earth. People are going to be tortured. And so that's the main belief in Christianity when it comes to the rapture, the timing of the rapture. But there's also there's two other main ones. There's the mid-tribulation rapture, where they believe it happens after 3.5 years. They believe God is going to rapture up the church in the middle of the rapture. Yeah. There's actually others too, but I'm just going to talk about the main three, because if we talk about all the different rapture beliefs, we'd be here all day long. So the mid-tribulation rapture, he'll rapture up, and then the second half is when God pours out his wrath. He'll pour it out for 3.5 years, and then then there will be 1,000 years of peace where Jesus himself will literally come down to earth and live with his people, and it'll be like Garden of Eden conditions all over again. And but then there's the mid-tribulation is the third most popular. The post-tribulation is the most popular belief. And then the second most popular belief, which is the one I believe, is called the pre-tribulation rapture, where they believe the church gets raptured out before this entire 7-year even starts, before it even happens. So basically they believe in this imminent, can happen at any moment, at a blink of an eye. You don't know when it's going to happen. Just one day you could be driving your car, or you could be getting ready for work one morning, and then boom, you're raptured out of here. And can happen anytime. You don't know when it's going to happen. And so this is a pre-tribulation rapture. This is Assembly of God believes this, and they take it very, very seriously. In fact, you can't even be a minister in the Assembly of God church unless you believe in the pre-tribulation rapture. You can't believe in mid or post. You have to openly agree and sign your name that you believe in the pre-tribulation rapture, because it's part of their 16 fundamental truth. And so people may be asking questions. Well, if this concept is in the Bible, why is there so much debate on it? I'm like, well, first I would like to say that there's actually quite a bit of debate on various topics amongst Christianity, but this is a big one. The rapture is a very big debate amongst Christianities. In fact, there are literal debates on it where Christians actually debate this like it's a political issue or something. And so that brings me to my next part. So even though I was questioning some of the gifts of the Spirit, like speaking in tongues, because in Pentecostalism we believe in 9. They believe in 9 gifts of the Spirit, and speaking in tongues is one of them. So that was the first of the 9 that I started to question. It's actually not the first thing about my denomination I actually started to question, though. Between the years of 2015 to the years of 2017, I often asked myself if I really believed in the pre-tribulation rapture. I wasn't finding this concept in the Bible, and when I prayed about it, I wasn't really getting an answer. However, through the years, different preachers like Perry Stone, anyone who knows Perry Stone will know who I'm talking about. If you don't know who he is, then you just simply don't know who he is, but he's a pretty famous preacher in the Christian world. Would use some kind of typology saying, like, if you study the Jewish wedding, then you'll see that it has to be a pre-tribulation rapture. So they wouldn't use like literal scriptures in the Bible. They would use like these typologies, like when Jesus fed the 5,000, after they picked up the baskets, the Bible only mentions the bread. It doesn't mention the fish. The fish are gone. And so they think of that as a typology for the rapture, like the fish are representing Christians and were raptured out, and things like that. And the Jewish wedding, if you study the Jewish wedding, it takes like so long because the ancient Jew, I should specify it's the ancient Jewish wedding. They have to go through this long process, and if you study it, it sort of kind of mimics what a lot of Christians believe about the pre-tribulation rapture and how the 7-year tribulation will operate and all that stuff. So they believe that this somehow directly came from God or the Holy Spirit or whatever, and that's why Jewish people did it this way back in ancient times. There's a ton of them. They're typologies. There was another. Oh yeah, Noah's Ark is often considered a typology for the pre-tribulation. You know that got onto the ark and before God poured out His wrath. Sodom and Gomorrah, sometimes referred to as a typology for the, God had to get them out of the city before He poured down His wrath. He had to get Lot and his wife and his family out of there before they were allowed to, because the angel even makes a statement to Lot, says, I literally cannot pour out the wrath until you are out of here, and so they look at that as, oh yeah, the tribulation literally cannot start until the Christians are raptured out of here. They have to be off the face of the earth before this can start. So, and they look at this. But I became dissatisfied over a period of time. Those kind of answers and stuff like that would kind of satisfy me for a little while. But then the more I started to think about it, and more I was just like, I became dissatisfied with those answers, because I started to realize with stuff like that, I mean, if you go through the Bible or really anything, you want something to represent, to back up something you're saying, and you're using like metaphors and stuff like that, you can do that with pretty much anything. And they're jumping all over the Bible that really, stories and scriptures that really have nothing to do with the rapture. And so it's like, where they, so that was just kind of my mindset. I was just like, I didn't necessarily disagree with typologies. I thought they were always interesting as a Christian. I was like, oh yeah, that's interesting that you can look at different stories in the Bible and see the spiritual significance of that. I think that's kind of cool. But I was just kind of dissatisfying that as being a reason why you believe something. I just didn't know if I thought that was a good idea. So let's see, typology. And these answers would satisfy me temporarily, but eventually I would start to question it again. One day I was watching a debate between two Christians. This gets into the debate. One believed in the pre-tribulation rapture, and the other believed in the post-tribulation rapture. And during this debate, the one that believed in the post-tribulation made a statement that forever changed my life. I know that sounds like a dramatic statement, but it really did. He said, the only reason why some Christians believe in the pre-tribulation rapture is because they've been taught that concept. They didn't get it from the Bible. If you read the Bible without this preconceived idea, your conclusion would not be the pre-tribulation rapture. And so when he said that statement, I kind of was taken back a little bit by it, and I was like, I never really thought about it that way before. And so that's when I asked other Christians like that I knew online and stuff like that. I was like, what's your favorite scripture to back up the pre-tribulation rapture? Because like the ones that I knew believed in it. And they would usually always say, like, I think it's in Second Corinthians chapter 4, I believe. I may be wrong about that, but it talks about, the trump will sound, and then you know those who are dead in Christ will rise first, and then we who are alive on the earth will, be raptured up and forever remain. Actually, it doesn't say rapture, but it says caught up and will be forever be with the Lord. And I was like, well, it says this event will take place, but it doesn't tell you that it happens before the 7-year tribulation. You could just as easy apply this scripture to the mid or post or any rapture concept you believe in. Or they might say, I think it's in First Thessalonians, chapter 2, I believe. Like I said, and it's pretty much says in a nutshell the same thing. It talks about this, we shall not all die, but some of us who are on the earth will be raptured up. This is coming from Paul. He was trying to encourage certain Christians, saying that some of us won't even taste death because he believed that this was something that was going to come soon, that Jesus was going to come back and take his church up before before the end of time. So he was using this as an encouragement. And again, pre-tribulationists will say, oh, there it is. And I'm like, well, again, it doesn't say that Paul didn't say, oh, and then the 7-year tribulation begins, and then or any kind of clue, anchor point that would pinpoint you to that beginning of that 7 year. I mean, you could apply that to any part of the 7 years. And so when he said that, that kind of opened up my mind, not only about the pre-tribulation rapture, but actually about the rapture in general. I started to study the Bible and started to realize that the concept of the rapture as a whole was kind of a faulty concept, from a biblical point of view. Like, I wasn't really seeing any strong scriptures that fully backed up this belief about this rapture happening. It's like, yeah, Paul kind of mentions this, like people being caught up, but that's kind of a vague statement. I mean, it's like, and I've kind of applied that the same thing. I was like, well, I believe that that's what it's talking about because I've been taught that in my life. I'm like, what if I was never heard about Jesus, or like, let's just say I just got saved because all I heard was Jesus died on the cross for my sins, and I accepted that for whatever reason. But I knew like nothing about the Bible and never heard about the rapture or anything like that. And I started reading the Bible. I wouldn't come across that scripture and sit there and be like, oh, we're going to be raptured up one day. That wouldn't be my first thought. I wouldn't think that. Even if I read the Bible for years and years and really studied it out, I still probably wouldn't come to that conclusion. And so, like, the only reason why so many Christians agree on that those are talking about this concept of this rapture is because they've been taught that their whole lives. So then when they come across, geez, this fly keeps getting to me in my fucking face. It comes across, that comes across these scriptures, they already have this preconceived idea that kind of helps them interpret it in a certain way. So this is really why this statement really started to change my life in a way, because I started thinking about this in all kinds of ways when I started reading the Bible. And this leads me to the next part called Leaving Christianity. This is when I finally I went beyond just doubting my Pentecostal beliefs and it went fully into the where I was just doubting everything about my beliefs now. So it kind of, during this time before I started doubting things, I was considering what kind of church I wanted to go to, because I was like, I didn't really consider myself to be a Pentecostal anymore. And so I had considered some non-denominational churches. And the problem with a lot of non-denominational ones, especially the ones in the area I live in, is most of them are essentially just Pentecostal churches, except they don't affiliate with a particular denomination. And so I'm like, I'm still probably not going to believe like one of them, but I was open minded and I was like, if I find one that I feel like, don't have a lot of those Pentecostal beliefs, then I'm cool with it. I can get down with those people. And I had considered like Baptist and stuff like that because I was like, well, Baptists are a lot like Pentecostals. The only difference is the only major difference anyway. And it's fair to say there's a lot of different denominations with Baptists as well because there's like First Baptist, Second Baptist, Southern Baptist, Independent Baptist. There's a bunch of them. And they all have slightly different beliefs. Um, so I'd considered maybe like First Baptist or something like that because they seem like I'm like they believe a lot like Pentecostals do. They just don't believe in this concept of these 9 gifts of spirit and stuff like that and speaking in tongues. Well, actually, First Baptists do believe in tongues and interpretation. They just believe that this concept is extremely rare, and they do not believe in the concept of praying in tongues like in your personal life, like that, like some Pentecostals do. And they don't believe in that concept. So I was like, yeah, I think I can get down with these people too. But I wanted some time to kind of just be away from other Christians for a while. That I don't really know why. I think it's just because I just needed some time to think. I had basically started doubting something that I was literally raised to believe my entire life, and so I needed some time to think for a little while and kind of what I wanted to do. I didn't want to make any rash decisions and stuff like that. So and but during this time, so I kind of just was doing my own little personal Bible studies and stuff like that at home. I was still reading my Bible and praying and stuff like that. And as I came through across certain scriptures in the Bible, ones that used to never bother me before, a few of them started to bother me a little bit. And particularly with the way I personally, like I talked about earlier, the way I painted, my own personal picture of God. I painted him as this all loving, nice, forgiving, oh, he understands, yeah, he believes in this is coming from someone who still believed in the concept of hell, and I still saw God as that. And uh, I came across scriptures like, there was one in Exodus, I think. The Israelites just got, out of slavery from Egypt, and they were in the desert. And Moses, I think they had just gotten the 10 Commandments at that point. He had just come off Mount Sinai and given them presented the 10 Commandments, and they read them off and all that good stuff. And there were some people that were still being disobedient to God, and so Moses goes back on the mountain to speak with God, and their way of resolving this situation was to divide the people up. I don't know. The Bible doesn't specify like if they voluntarily divided up or what. It just said divide the people up or whatever, or if their parent, like the parents and the families or whatever, kicked certain family members away from them because like you're not a follower of the God of Moses like we are, so get over on that side. I don't know how they divided them up, but it just said they divided them up. So and it said anyone who is not on the Lord's side, they basically took swords of the followers of God and went in and literally slaughtered everyone who was not on the Lord's side. Like they just walked through there and started chopping all their heads off. So, and I was very taken aback by that. And I thought that was a really abrupt kind of horrible thing to read. I mean, I know in the Old Testament there's a lot of crazy things that happen in the wars they get in with like the Philistines, but it's a little different when you're kind of thinking of what you would consider to be the good side and the bad side, But like these were their own people kind of, but I guess because they weren't really following the God of Moses, they were considered to be on the bad side. I don't know. It just really bothered me when I read it. So I was kind of like taken back by that. There's another one I think it's in Deuteronomy that talks about they had just went in to the land of Canaan because they hadn't quite became.
Hey, Kevin,
They weren't living, huh?
you're kind of getting off.
Okay, we're almost out of time. Okay, so Eric brought it to my attention that I was kind of being a little rambly, so I'm going to try to wrap up this part real quick and then move on.
Okay, don't make me sound bad.
No, I don't mean it in a bad way. Like he was bringing it to my attention and let me know because I am bad about rambling, so I'm very aware of what I do. Like, don't get me wrong, I know like how I am when I start talking. So and so basically, I'll just quickly explain what I was explaining. Yeah, but it is just scriptures like that because Deuteronomy had also mentioned. I can't remember the exact chapter, but it mentions talking about where they had bring in these slaves. They were essentially like I don't know, like teenagers, I guess. And Moses tells them to kill all the boys, but then keep the girls to themselves to do whatever they want with. You can fill in the blanks there. So it was like a lot of things like that I never noticed before, and I was just kind of like, it was just scripture after scripture that I just started having major problems with. Not even just in the Old Testament, but New Testament as well. Like even some of the things Jesus directly said himself, or at least claimed to say, in the Gospels. I was just like, I was just suddenly started seeing major problems because I was coming in with this new mindset where I was trying to read the Bible without these preconceived ideas of what I had been taught as a child and as a teenager and young adult, etc.
Yeah.
So I still wasn't ready to let go. I was very stubborn with my Christian beliefs for a while there because this was probably like I would say mid 2018 when I was doing all this, and maybe even this probably went on for, I would say, a good 6 months to maybe almost a year. And so even up into mid 2019, I was still just kind of like doing a lot of thinking, and but I just was not. I wasn't gonna just put my Bible down and be like, okay, I'm done with Christianity. I just couldn't bring myself to do something like that. I was just like, that would be like saying goodbye to part of myself. Like, I'm like, how can I do that? I just like, but admittedly, like I said, I couldn't get down with some of these things that the Bible was saying, and some of the things that, I would watch a sermon online, and some of the things that pastors were saying. And I was just like, I can't even believe that I actually used to agree with some of this stuff. It's just like, I just couldn't get down with it anymore. It was like, I couldn't basically be the Christian that I was before. So basically I had become this Christian, someone who still believed like a Christian, but I wasn't going to church. I wasn't reading my Bible because basically everything I did that involved Christianity was bothering me. And so I for a good 6 to 8 months there throughout the rest of 2019, I basically just kind of took on this, secret Christian life. I don't know, like where I was still technically a Christian and yes, kind of believed like one, but it was a really weird, awkward in between stage where I was like, I knew I should let go of this belief because I just couldn't, get down with these concepts anymore. But I just didn't want to. Basically, that's what it came down to. I did not want to let go of it. But finally, I bit the bullet. And in late 2019, I think it was around it was like November, December, somewhere around in that bracket. I finally decided that I was stepping away from Christianity, and I wanted, basically, not to sound too dramatic, but I wanted nothing to do with it anymore. But I also had no problem with other Christians. That was the statement. I even made the statement, when I was confessing all this stuff to my sister years ago. I was just like, I have no problems with other Christians. I understand people believe differently, but this is not something I want to do anymore. I just don't want to be, involved in this community and this religion and this lifestyle. That's just not me anymore. I'm not trying not to be a Christian. In fact, was trying to still be a Christian. It was the exact opposite. But I just couldn't be anymore. So I admitted to my sister one time that I even considered just basically faking Christianity, like the rest of my life, because I just couldn't imagine my life not going to church and reading my Bible and stuff. And she kind of laughed a little bit, like, geez, you really were being stubborn. I was like, I know, but I just couldn't imagine myself not being a Christian. And And I was like, so even if I didn't believe like one, I was just going to pretend to believe like one. And I considered that for a little while, but no, I finally decided obviously that wouldn't be a good idea, not in the long run, especially. And so I finally let go. And about the time COVID hit was when I was, I considered myself to be an agnostic during this time. But looking back, I think I was actually more of a deist because I definitely still believed in a higher power or some kind of God or gods, plural. I just didn't believe. I kind of took on that mentality that some people believe, where they believe that there probably was a God that created the world and the universe, or gods in general, but they just it's kind of like your dad that left with the milk. They did that, and then they were like, we're done. We did our job. You're on your own. And I guess that's so. I didn't think about it that hard though. But that if someone were to straight up asked me like, what do you literally believe the creator or creators of the universe did, and I'm like, I guess something like that, like they created it but they don't interfere with our day-to-day lives or try to in any way. So, and I have also had the mindset, I'm like, look, if there's a creator or creators out there and they want me to do something specific, they know where I am. Come find me and tell me what to do, like, and reveal yourself to me. That was kind of my mindset. So until you do that, I'm just going to live my life the way I see that's good for me, And so I did that. Went on for several years, and finally, let's see. This is basically I'm not a Christian anymore at this point. So the rest of this, I'm just going to kind of breeze through this because this is kind of like the bonus material. Bonus. If this was a DVD, this would be the bonus settings, I guess. That's kind of a weird way of putting it, but yeah, that's kind of a good analogy, I guess. So at this point, was a deist, but considered myself agnostic at the time. For, like I said, this probably a couple years, really, a good year and a half, almost 2 years there. And I started to do a lot more heavy studying on evolution. I really knew very little about it because of my upbringing. I mean, my church literally didn't believe, like they believed it was, a lot of stuff that was taught by scientists evolution wise was made up. It was all a conspiracy theory to try to get people to convert to atheism. They believed atheism was like some kind of weird religion or something, and evolution was some kind of religion. And I know it all sounds weird. But and so that was my upbringing. So and the school I went to, I live in the Bible Belt, so it's like the school I went to, they taught some, but they didn't really teach all that much. So I just had such a poor understanding about it. So I thought it'd be interesting now that I wasn't Christian anymore, and I didn't have to worry about feeling guilty about supposedly, studying evolution. I thought it would be kind of a fun thing to study. So I was just kind of doing it for fun. I didn't really had a goal or mean or anything for doing it. So I did that for a couple years. It took a little bit of time for me to fully get the full concept of it. Because at first I was just like, how do they know that? How do they know that? I was very like, aggressive. How do they know that? Because that was my old Christian self trying to come back up. Like, how do you know that? How do you know that? But then they would explain it, and they'd be like, well, we know this because of that. I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And and so finally, as I started to understand this a lot better, I started kind of seeing like, again, I understand that most evolutionists are actually Christians, and most evolutionists still believe in a higher power, even if they're not Christian. So I'm not trying to say just because you understand evolution that automatically makes you an atheist, but that is something that happened to me. As the more I understood this, the more I just didn't really, feel like I needed believe this concept. It wasn't like I wasn't trying to believe in a higher power. Because like I said, I already didn't believe in the Christian God anymore. I wasn't trying to get away from anything or whatever. I was just, studying this out. And that was just the conclusion I came to. I just was no longer believing in some kind of God or higher power. So I basically became atheist, and that's what I still am today. And so that just came about from studying evolution. But I understand that obviously not everyone's going to come to that same conclusion. In fact, most people didn't come to that conclusion. That was just a me thing. And I like I said, I don't want to get too political here, so I'll keep this part super brief. But this will be the last little part that kind of changed in me. I used to be extremely conservative, mostly when it came to political issues, but that I found myself in the past, like I'd say year-ish, that started to change too, because I realized most of my political beliefs were also affected by my Christian upbringing, and particularly with my household and stuff that I grew up in. And so I started to realize after I didn't see myself as a Christian anymore, I started asking myself questions like, well, why do I really believe this? And why do I really, have this viewpoint when it comes to, these policies? And I realized that it was all based upon that. And I started to, when I studied it out for myself, the conclusion personally I came to that I just couldn't bring myself to affiliate with like capitalism and conservatism anymore. So I have become much more of a socialist kind of mindset person now. Like I said, I don't want to go into too many more details on that because I understand everybody has their political beliefs, and I understand that there are even atheists out there that are also capitalist and conservatives. So I understand that's not an atheism thing. That was just something that I realized through my own study that I was just like, yeah, I feel like this is the best for society, not, what I used to believe because based on my own Christian beliefs. So, that
really
pretty much ends my story pretty much.
Yeah. I'm really starting to learn, like, just think about it, like, with you saying that little last bit, we've never really talked politics.
Yeah, I think we sort of purposely avoid that. Politics now, especially nowadays, are a very tricky thing to talk about public. I mean, I would almost rather talk about other religions than talk about politics on here. It's just too, iffy of a thing to talk about. So, especially nowadays, because people are just so opinionated when it comes to their political views. So,
and they're opinionated about everything.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen people more divided nowadays when it comes to politics. I mean, now it's just crazy how people are like ready to just have a fist fight over. I was like, calm down, like it's not. It's like you have your viewpoint and I have, and that's okay. That's what makes us all unique and different. I don't feel like we can't, but I just, I just don't feel comfortable talking publicly about politics a whole lot. I don't mind talking about them a little bit, but I just don't like to go into specifics. But yeah. But that pretty much wraps things up. That was pretty much the last thing in me that changed recently. Anyway, maybe something else will change. But was my political views. So I always considered myself socially liberal when it came to social ideas. But when it came to political ideas, yeah, I definitely always conservative. But that changed recently. I see myself way more liberal, very, very far left now, pretty much with everything. So,
yeah.
So yeah. I don't know much time we have left, but I don't really have anything else to talk about with that. So, is there anything else you want to add, Eric?
Well, I mean, I guess I was going to add anything with the topic at hand. There's not really much to add considering this is just because there's not much for me to talk about with a person's personal journey.
Yeah.
Because like if you were to add anything or whatever, it's like you're either going to be condescending of their journey or like, woo, yay, you did a good job.
But yay, you got away from that or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of, my part in this episode is kind of more just reminding you that we do have a limited time on our episode. Yeah, I mean, each person's journey is their own journey, and everyone comes to a different conclusion. Like, me and you have a similar conclusion on when it comes to the Bible and religion in some aspects.
Yeah.
Our biggest divide would probably be politics.
Yeah.
And that's just because for me, I hate both conservatives and liberals. I think both sides are idiots in some aspects. No, that's neither here nor there. Well, yeah, I mean, if y'all have anything, any listeners have anything to say about, his journey and his viewpoints, comment and like, as in, before every episode, I double check and make sure, about comments and this and that. And if there's no comments, I don't bring anything up. Except for to, remind y'all can comment.
Yeah.
And I would probably less Kevin, way more, most likely me will have something to say about it. I'm not going to ever say if it's good or it's going to be a good or bad comment, I might say, but you'll be heard in some aspects.
People can say whatever they want. I don't care.
They can do whatever they want. I mean,
yeah, and that includes Eric. I mean, if he disagrees with me on something, I don't mind. He can voice it. So, yeah, but I do this. I will admit this is not kind of stuff I really like to talk about. So if you do have questions, I don't mind answering them, but don't expect more episodes of just me going out of my way like I did with this episode to talk about it. Like, I'm not going to do like what Rhett and Link do on their podcast, where every year they give an update on how their ex-Christian lives have changed. Like, I'm not doing that. Like, this was a one-time thing. But if you do have questions, yeah, I'll answer those. Those are fine. But I'm not going to make a whole episode about me leaving Christianity again. So, because this is not something I don't like talking about my former Christian life really at all. So, I just wanted to get this stuff off my chest.
Yeah. Next week we'll be back to our regular schedule. No. Have you have your own thoughts you want to share, and we can discuss in the next episode or an episode to that, whatever you post it, and I see the comment. And other than that, do your typical job. The typical job we have to do. Like, comment, subscribe. Listen to us on Spotify or YouTube, whichever you prefer to listen to your podcasts.
Oh, yeah.
We do have an Instagram, which is...
you always catch me off guard with that. barf_city_podcast.
I don't know everything that he puts on there. I kind of let him run the show the way he wants to, and I just jibber jabber. Yeah, maybe we'll do some cool stuff on that at some point. I don't know. They're at the end of this weird episode for me.
I can tell you have a very awkward way of you're talking. I'm like, man, I can tell he's like very awkward out by something. Apparently, I said something that put him off, that made him off put.
Well, it's just nothing he said really put me off in a sense. Like,
yeah, it's definitely a very different episode than what we normally do. Like, so if you're listening to this episode and this is your first time listening, like, understand this is not norm for us. Like, we normally are just talking usually. So
yeah, if you can't tell by how I'm like, I don't know, I don't really know where to go from here. Just it's very chaotic end to the episode, people. We appreciate any listeners, and yeah, have fun. Bye.